I was sitting on the middle step again. The cold concrete was seeping into my jeans, but I didn't care. The pain in my calves was a scream, a deep, grinding ache that didn't belong in a sturdy woman like me. My breath kept catching, shallow and useless. 3 steps. Only 3 steps up to the kitchen, and they felt like I was climbing out of a grave. For 35 years, I was Maggie O'Connell, the head cook at Central High. I hauled 100-pound sacks of flour. I stood on my feet for 8 hours in blistering cafeteria heat. My back was strong. My legs were like oak stumps. 74 years old now, and I was failing hard. The doctor, Dr. Reynolds, he was a nice young man. He had a nice white coat and a confused look. He'd run all the fancy tests, the ones that cost more than I made in a year. Everything was inconclusive. "We're managing the blood pressure, Maggie," he'd say, tapping his pen. "But sometimes the system just slows down. It is what it is." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I figured this was my punishment for a life spent serving 300 hungry kids every day. I was falling apart from the inside. This modest townhouse in Ohio was everything to me. My late husband, Thomas, and I paid for it, brick by bloody brick. It was my sanctuary. Now it felt like a trap, built by my own failing body. My only son, David, he was a good boy. Too kind, maybe. Too soft. And he was married to Clara. Clara. She was sharp as a tack, worked in accounts payable, and she treated my life like a spreadsheet that needed balancing. They lived far away in a tiny place, and this house, my house, was always mentioned, always. Not directly, of course. Just little veiled comments like mice nibbling at the edges of my peace. "Mom, are you sure you won't consider a community?" Clara asked last week. She leaned in, smiling that sickly sweet smile that never reached her eyes. "Think of the freedom. No stairs, no yard, no stress." "I'm fine right here," I snapped back. It was a rare moment of strength. "My bridge club is here, and I'm not moving until the good Lord calls me home." That shut her up for 5 minutes, but the pressure was always there, hanging in the air like dust. The most stressful thing was the help she insisted on giving me. When I stopped driving 6 months ago because of the dizziness, Clara stepped right in. She did the errands, she brought the meals, and she insisted on my daily hydration. She had read some article about processed sugar. Clara always had an article. So every morning she'd refill my big metal thermos with this liquid. She claimed it was vital for circulation and kidney support. I hated it. It was vaguely sweet, but also salty, with a strange metallic taste. I'd drink it anyway, feeling guilty if I left even a sip. I thought it was the only thing keeping me alive. But I had started noticing something strange, something that gave me the chills, even in the heat of an Ohio summer. My symptoms, the dizziness, the crushing leg pain, the frantic gasping for air. They always seemed to get dramatically worse about half an hour after I finished that thermos. It was too much of a coincidence, too reliable. This afternoon was the worst. I had forced myself down the 3 basement steps to switch the laundry. Getting down was agony. Getting back up felt impossible. I had managed to pull myself to the landing, resting my heavy, swollen ankles, when David came down. "It's the heat, Mom," he said. But he was jumpy. He wasn't looking at me. He was fiddling with his phone in his inner jacket pocket, his shoulders tense. I started pulling myself up, gripping the railing until my knuckles were white. David turned to help me, pulling my arm roughly. As he moved, I saw him quickly shove something deep into his jacket, a clear plastic bag. It was small, like the packets of sugar or salt substitute they have at the diner. It was gone almost before I registered it. But David's face. Lord have mercy, his face was pale and guilty. The last time I saw that look was 40 years ago, when I caught him smoking behind the school bleachers. "What was that, David?" My voice was raspy from the effort of breathing. "Nothing, Mom. Just some vitamins for my lunch," he stammered, avoiding my eyes. He helped me up the final step, but the touch felt cold, like a stranger's. He hurried me back upstairs and settled me on the couch with the air conditioning blast. He was trying too hard to act normal. But the image of that clear bag and his terrified eyes stayed glued to my mind. That night, the heaviness in my legs wasn't just lead. It was buzzing, vibrating like angry bees trapped under my skin. My chest felt tight, tighter than a belt cinched too tight. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. I must be falling apart, I thought, tears welling up. I'm getting old and confused. I'm starting to imagine things. But then I remembered Clara's smile, always talking about the house, David's guilty face and the quick movement of his hand, and that strange, sweet, salty, metallic liquid I had to drink every morning. The pieces didn't fit the picture of natural decline. They fit something else, something terrifying. Just then, I heard the creaking of the floorboards in the living room. David and Clara were talking. I hadn't quite closed my bedroom door. It was just a crack open, thin enough for sound to sneak through. Clara's voice was low, but sharp, like broken glass. "You need to be patient, David," she hissed. "We talked about this. You saw the bills. We can't afford to wait years. The routine is accelerating things." David mumbled something back, a whine of protest. "Accelerating, yes, but we need to keep the appearance of care," Clara insisted. The venom in her words was thick. "She drinks it every morning without fail. The doctors are already confused. It's only a matter of weeks, maybe days, before she completely loses mobility. Then the house is ours." I froze, every muscle locked up, but not from the illness, from sheer terror. The crushing weight in my chest was not my failing heart. It was the crushing weight of betrayal. The pain was not random. The weakness was not age. They were doing something. A routine. Accelerating things. My son died, David, the moment he let a stranger plan my funeral. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was completely alone, trapped inside my own sick body, praying to God that I hadn't already drunk enough of that daily dose to kill me before morning. They didn't know I was listening. They thought I was just a tired old woman, waiting to die. I knew why I was sick. I just didn't know what they were doing, or how I could possibly fight back when I could barely walk 3 steps. I just needed someone, anyone, to see the deadly secret hidden in that thermos. The silence after they went to bed was heavy. It was a thick, terrible blanket over the house. I lay there feeling the terror of what Clara had said. The routine is accelerating things. That phrase kept spinning in my head. I had been scared of dying, but now I was scared of being murdered, and the hands doing the work belonged to my own son. I couldn't just lie there and wait for them to finish the job. I had to know for sure. The next morning, Clara brought the thermos in, all bright and cheerful. "Here you are, Mom. Essential hydration." I smiled back, the dying woman's smile, but inside my gut was churning like a washing machine. I took a few sips, making sure the rim looked wet. The taste was sickeningly sweet and metallic, that strange saltiness covering everything. Clara left to run her errands. I waited 5 minutes. Then I didn't pour the drink down the sink like I planned. That would leave residue. I poured the whole lot into a sturdy plastic storage container. I filled the thermos up with plain tap water, put the lid back on, and hid the container in the bottom of the deep freezer, under a bag of frozen peas. I sat on the couch waiting for the sickness to hit. 30 minutes passed. No crushing pain, no buzzing lead in my legs. My ankles felt heavy, sure, but they weren't screaming like they usually did. My breath was shallow, but I wasn't gasping, fighting for every mouthful of air. I stood up, slowly. My legs ached. They were stiff, but I could move them. I managed to walk 5 steps to the little blood pressure machine Clara had given me. I checked my reading. 160/98. Still too high, but nowhere near the 170/100 that I'd been hitting every day for the last 6 months after drinking the whole thermos. It wasn't age. It wasn't my heart failing on its own. It was that liquid, that sweet, salty poison. I sat back down, breathing hard. The shock didn't make me scared. It made me furious. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively pushing me off a cliff, and I had been helping them. You live and learn, I thought bitterly. I had been too trusting. The investigation started small. I had to keep up the performance of the frail old woman. Whenever David or Clara came over, I put on a show. The panting, the leaning heavily on the walker, the exhausted collapses onto the couch. But the moment they left, I was in business. I knew I couldn't go to Dr. Reynolds. Clara had been feeding him notes, talking about my poor compliance and how my system was slowing down. He would just call David and Clara, and they would rush me off to a community before I could prove a thing. I needed someone outside the family, outside the hospital system. I needed Eleanor. Eleanor Vance lived 2 houses down. She was my bridge partner, yes, but before retirement she had been a nurse practitioner. She was smart, quiet, and she didn't mince words. My chance came late on a Tuesday afternoon. I waited until I knew David was at work and Clara was at her accounts payable job downtown. I managed the 2 steps down to the front hall, grabbing my cane, forcing myself to the front porch. I pretended I was struggling to bring in the mail from the curb, a task that usually left me crying in pain. When Eleanor's little green sedan pulled into her driveway, I made sure I was leaning heavily against my wrought iron fence, looking miserable. "Maggie! Lord have mercy! What are you doing out here? You look terrible." Eleanor called, rushing toward me, her arms full of groceries. "Elle," I whispered, my voice rough. "Help me get this mail inside. I need to talk to you. Alone. It's about David and Clara, and I think they're trying to kill me." Eleanor didn't flinch. She just looked at me, her sharp eyes taking me in, the swelling in my ankles, the shallow breathing. She helped me inside and put the kettle on, ignoring my attempts to pant dramatically. I told her everything. The veiled comments about the house, the 350 $600 value, David's guilty face and the small plastic bag, the symptoms worsening only after the drink, and finally, the terrible things Clara said while she thought I was sleeping. I pulled out the plastic container with the yellow-tinged liquid from the freezer. "I didn't drink this morning, Elle, and look." I showed her my blood pressure log for the day, 145/90 mmHg. Eleanor took the container. She smelled it, frowned, and tasted a tiny drop with the tip of her finger. "Vaguely sweet, but salty and metallic," she murmured. "Maggie, this is simple, but wicked. If they are trying to accelerate cardiovascular distress, they wouldn't use expensive toxins. They would use something common, something that mimics the symptoms of kidney or heart failure. She looked at the yellow color. They claim it's for circulation. But Maggie, this has all the signs of excessive electrolytes. Probably high sodium, possibly combined with something like potassium chloride substitutes. Things people on certain diets use. But if you have underlying kidney issues, which Dr. Reynolds hasn't ruled out, this would be deadly. Eleanor explained it simply, the way you'd tell a worried grandchild. Imagine your kidneys are like a slow filter. They can only process so much salt and potassium in a day. Clara is overloading your system, Maggie. Too much potassium chloride and sodium. It causes massive fluid retention, which is why your legs swell and feel like lead. That swelling pushes your blood pressure up to dangerous levels. That's the crushing pain and the gasping. They are giving you the symptoms of heart failure without it actually being your heart failing. At least, not yet. I remembered David's panicked expression and the small clear bag. A packet of seasoning, a substitute. So the doctors, they see the pressure, they see the swelling, they see the fatigue, and they say, "It's just age?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed, her face grim. "They are looking for a complex disease, Maggie. They aren't looking for cheap grocery store poisoning. It's insidious. It looks like you're falling apart naturally, just like they wanted." Eleanor took the container. "I have a friend who runs a small testing lab. I can't get a full toxicology report, but I can get a rapid mineral content test. We need proof, Maggie. Hard proof. That night I didn't sleep at all. But the terror was mixed with a cold, clear clarity. They were trying to poison me for the house for $350,000. And my son was helping. Eleanor came back 2 days later. She didn't come to the front door. She parked down the street and slipped in through my back gate, like a spy. She sat me down at the kitchen table. In front of her, she placed a small printed sheet. "Here's the report, Maggie. It's conclusive enough for our purpose. The liquid is practically a brine solution. The sodium content is 4 times what a person your age should consume in a single drink, and the potassium chloride is off the charts. It's designed to incapacitate you quickly. The pain of the betrayal was worse than the pain in my legs had ever been. It was a physical stab in the gut. I had loved my son. I had sacrificed everything for him. And he was letting his wife do this. I buried my face in my hands. 'Oh, David,' I whispered. 'The apple doesn't fall far from the tree,' my own mother used to say. But I never thought that tree would be rotten. You have to get angry, Maggie.' Eleanor said softly, resting a hand on my shoulder. 'You have to grieve later. Right now, you have to fight. They're expecting you to die, or at least to be completely incapable of resistance. If you sign that power of attorney, Clara can put you in a home and sell this house before Christmas.' I wiped my tears on my robe sleeve. Eleanor was right, over my dead body. Not this house, not this way. 'They talk in the living room,' I told her. 'They think I'm deaf, or maybe that I just don't understand. I need proof of their intent.' I went straight to the closet and pulled out the ancient voice recorder Thomas used for birdwatching. It was heavy, silver, and still had batteries. That evening, I set the trap. I placed the recorder under the sofa skirt in the living room, near where Clara always sat. I went to bed early, making sure my door was slightly ajar. I listened to the silence, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Around 9 o'clock, I heard the door open. David and Clara came in. "She's been quiet all day," Clara said, her voice sounding smug. "She's finally giving up the fight. It's what we wanted, David." David's voice was a low mumble. She looks so weak, Clara. I wish we didn't have to push her so hard. Don't be soft, Clara snapped. We saw the pressure logs this morning, still high. But we need to make sure she signs the POA quickly. We can't let her have any lucid moments where she decides to call the police. The lawyer has us scheduled for Thursday afternoon. We tell him she's too confused to manage her affairs, show him the medical records, and have her sign. She paused, then laughed a small, dry, cruel sound. I'm going to have this house listed before the 6-month residency period is up. $350, maybe $400,000 in equity, David. That pays off all our debt. It's only a matter of weeks now. The silence hung for a second. She's hardly moving now, Clara continued. That's good. The routine is accelerating things. I lay there, listening to the casual discussion of my impending death, the hatred radiating from Clara, the pathetic weakness from my son. The physical pain I was feeling didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was stopping them. I had the proof. Now I needed strength. The next morning I was a different woman. I was still shaking, but now it was from controlled rage, not weakness. Eleanor arrived bright and early. I played the recording for her. When Clara said the words, "It's only a matter of weeks," Eleanor gasped. "Maggie, this is everything. We have the motive, the method, and the timeline, but we can't go to the police yet. If you are visibly sick when they arrest them, Clara's lawyer will claim you're confused and suffering from delusion, and that the symptoms are real. You have to reverse the symptoms." I looked at my swollen ankles. How, Elle? I can barely get up the kitchen steps. I'm scheduled to sign that power of attorney tomorrow. They have been counting on expensive drugs or slow, natural decline, Eleanor said, pulling out a small notebook. But we have a better way. We're going to hit them with simple physics and basic health facts they hid from you. We're going to reverse this fluid retention immediately. She drew a little diagram. Your problem is blood pressure and fluid. We need to redistribute the blood away from your heart and lower the pressure spikes that cause the dizziness and fatigue. We can do that naturally, without drugs. Tell me, I demanded. First, the edema and blood flow. Tonight I want you to start a warm foot soak. Just 15 minutes, every single evening. The warm water draws the blood flow away from your core and down to your feet. It relieves the pressure on your heart. Studies show that this simple soak can drop your blood pressure by an average of 23 systolic and 8 diastolic points. You measure it yourself, Maggie. She then showed me a calming technique. When you feel the anxiety or a pressure spike coming on, you use breathing. We call it the 4-2-6. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 2, exhale slowly for 6. Do this for just 2 minutes. It's proven to instantly reduce your systolic pressure by up to 18 mmHg. I was skeptical. A foot soak and breathing? After all the fancy tests? They want you to think it's complex, Eleanor said. It's not. It's simple self-care they denied you while they pumped you full of poison. I waited until Eleanor left and I got to work. I boiled water and found my old plastic dishpan. I sat on the toilet lid, put my feet into the wonderfully warm water, and set a timer for 15 minutes. The relief was immediate. The throbbing in my calves subsided. When the timer went off, I pulled my feet out and quickly checked my blood pressure. Before the soak, 168/98. After the soak, 145/90. I stared at the numbers. 23 points dropped on the top number, 8 points on the bottom. Just water. I actually laughed out loud, a sound I hadn't made in months. Well, I'll be. The next morning, Clara brought the thermos. The liquid I now knew contained my death sentence. I took my 3 fake sips, replaced the poison with tap water, and put the actual container of fluid in a specialized lockbox Eleanor had given me. I focused on the breathing technique. David walked in while I was watching TV. He looked tense. "Mom, Clara says you've been refusing the food she made you. You need to eat." I immediately felt my chest tighten, fear mixed with anger. My pressure felt like it was climbing. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the heat rise. I started the breathing. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. I repeated it twice. When I opened my eyes, the dizzy rush was gone. I checked my pressure 5 minutes later. 162/95. Stable. It hadn't spiked. I had controlled the pressure spike myself. I pretended to be too weak to talk. "Just tired, David," I rasped, leaning heavily on the walker I now hated. Over the next 36 hours, I lived 2 separate lives. When David and Clara were around, I was the frail, confused old woman, barely able to lift my head, letting David fuss over my heavy legs and swollen ankles. But the moment they left, I was in training. I did the foot soaks twice a day. I practiced the 4-2-6 breathing constantly. I even started walking laps around the dining room table, slowly at first, building up strength. My legs, relieved of the massive fluid retention, felt sturdy again, like the oak stumps Eleanor had once described them as. I prepared the final pieces of evidence. The locked box containing the poison, the recorded confession of Clara's greed, and my newly annotated blood pressure log showing the dramatic improvement since I stopped drinking her hydration. Wednesday night, Clara arrived, holding the power of attorney documents. The meeting with the lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, was tomorrow morning at 10. "We need to go over these, Mom," Clara said, her voice dripping with forced concern. "It's just easier for everyone if you sign tonight. We can cancel the lawyer's fees." She was nervous. She wanted it done fast. "I'm too tired, Clara," I croaked. "Maybe tomorrow. I just need to sleep." Clara huffed, annoyed. "Fine, but I'm staying here tonight. I need to make sure you're ready for the appointment." She settled in the living room, probably planning her new furniture arrangement. I lay in bed, listening to the floorboards creak. David was staying home tonight too, in the guest room. They were closing in. They thought they had won. I had the poisoned fluid locked away. I had the recordings. I had my clear mind. And my legs, which, for the first time in 6 months, felt strong and ready to hold me. I waited until I heard Clara open the refrigerator. Probably for a celebration drink. Maggie slid silently out of bed. The painful, crushing weight in her legs was gone, replaced by the sturdy muscle of the former cafeteria worker. I slipped into the living room. Clara was still by the fridge, looking triumphant, holding a glass. She was smiling to herself, rehearsing her lines for the lawyer. "You really should have just signed, Margaret." Clara sneered softly, holding the power of attorney document. It would have been easier on everyone. Clara turned and dropped the document in sheer terror. Maggie was not sitting down. She was not leaning on the wall. She was standing fully erect, arms crossed, bathed in the moonlight streaming through the window. She was no longer panting. Her breath was deep and steady, her face pale but fierce. In my hand, I held the tiny, unmarked voice recorder, its small red light blinking steadily, capturing Clara's final smug confession. "It seems," I said, my voice clear and hard as granite, "that the stress has finally lifted. Get out of my house, Clara, or I will call the police and show them exactly what was in that poison you've been forcing down my throat." Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story will travel. The lawyer's office of Jenkins and Associates felt too pristine, too polished for murder. It was Thursday, precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, and the scent of expensive leather mixed with the faint, metallic tang of my own anxiety. Clara and David walked in late, David fidgeting with his tie, Clara holding the power of attorney documents with a confident, almost eager grip. They stopped dead in the doorway. I was already seated at the polished mahogany table, not slumped, but straight-backed and dressed in my best navy suit. Beside me sat Eleanor Vance, wearing the calm smile of a scientist who just solved a complex problem. Opposite us, taking up the most space, sat Detective Sergeant Harrison of the Metropolitan Police in his dark blue uniform, holding a file so thick it looked like a small brick. Mr. Jenkins, the lawyer, looked grave, avoiding everyone's eye. "Mother, what is this?" David stammered, turning instantly pale. He glanced frantically at the police officer, then at me. "You were supposed to be too ill to leave the house." Clara, always the faster one to recover, laughed, a brittle, sharp sound. "This is highly inappropriate, Margaret. Harassing the lawyer with a friend and a policeman? Are you having one of your episodes of confusion again?" I did not answer. I had entered the office leaning heavily on my cane, exaggerating the limp that their poison had inflicted. Now, I placed my hands flat on the table and pushed myself up. I did not lean on the chair. I stood fully erect, taller than David, breathing deep and slow. The gasp that escaped Clara was far more satisfying than the one that used to choke me. I tossed the cane aside. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, but the sound was deafening in that sterile room. "The stress has lifted, Clara," I said, my voice clear and steady, the voice of the cafeteria manager, not the frail patient. "And with the stress gone, so are the symptoms." Detective Harrison took the lead, indicating for David and Clara to sit. He opened the file. "Clara O'Connell and David O'Connell, we are here today regarding a conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted homicide against Margaret O'Connell, centered on the power of attorney documents you intended to sign today." Clara scoffed. "This is absurd. Show us proof. She is clearly delusional." I slid the small silver voice recorder across the table toward the detective. He picked it up and pressed play. The metallic voice of Clara, clear and inarguable, filled the silence. "The lawyer has us scheduled for Thursday afternoon. We tell him she's too confused to manage her affairs, show him the medical records, and have her sign. I'm going to have this house listed before the 6-month residency period is up. $350, maybe $400,000 in equity, David. That pays off all our debt. It's only a matter of weeks now." The silence that followed was complete. David buried his face in his hands. Detective Harrison retrieved a sealed plastic bag from his file. "This substance, retrieved from Mrs. O'Connell's property, was analyzed. It is heavily concentrated with potassium chloride and sodium, elements known to induce severe edema and hypertension when consumed in high doses, mimicking the symptoms of catastrophic renal and heart failure. This was the routine accelerating things." Clara finally paled, but she tried a weak deflection. "It was a health supplement. We were trying to manage her circulation." "No, Clara, you weren't," Eleanor interjected, placing a printed medical report next to the toxicology file. "A health supplement is not designed to spike the patient's blood pressure to 170/100, which is what Maggie was recording every day after drinking your concoction. You are a nurse practitioner. You knew precisely what you were doing to mimic natural decline." I continued the assault, sliding my annotated blood pressure log across the table. "And here is the proof of the cure. For months, you told the doctor I was non-compliant, that my system was failing. But look here, I pointed to the final columns. When I stopped drinking your poison, the pressure dropped from 168/98 to 145/90, just by itself. And when I used the technique Eleanor taught me, a warm foot soak for 15 minutes, it dropped another 23 points systolic and 8 points diastolic immediately. You wanted the doctors to think the decline was complex, so they wouldn't look for the simple, cheap poison you were using. David suddenly stood up, stumbling slightly, his face wet with tears and desperation. Mom, stop. Please. I am your son. You can't do this. Think about the family. You are going to send your only child to prison over a house? He cried, his voice breaking. He was pleading, trying to weaponize the last shred of my love for him. I looked at him, my eyes hard and completely dry. I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. I worked 35 years, hauling flour, standing in blistering heat, serving 300 hungry kids every day, to buy this house, brick by bloody brick. I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of 74 years. You planned my death with poison for $350,000. My son died, David, the moment he watched his wife put poison into his mother's drink, and did nothing. The person sitting across from me is nothing but an accomplice to attempted murder. Detective Harrison acted instantly. He placed Clara under arrest for attempted homicide and elder abuse fraud, reading her rights as he secured the handcuffs. Clara didn't resist, but she screamed at David, a barrage of ugly, panicked accusations about his weakness and his failure to control me. David, meanwhile, was placed under arrest for complicity and conspiracy. Mr. Jenkins, shaking his head, confirmed that all power of attorney documents were immediately nullified and shredded. As David and Clara were escorted out of the pristine office, still arguing with each other about whose fault it was, the silence left behind was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The consequences were swift and absolute. Clara, due to her calculated planning, her medical knowledge as a former nurse practitioner, and the heinous nature of the attempted poisoning and fraud against an elderly relative, received a severe sentence of 18 years in federal prison in regime fachado. She lost her nursing license, and her reputation was utterly destroyed in the media coverage that followed the trial. David, despite his weak complicity and the emotional manipulation he attempted, was still convicted of conspiracy and received a 5-year suspended sentence, 5 years of strict probation, and was legally forced into an immediate divorce from Clara. He was obligated to pay the majority of my legal and investigatory fees, amounting to $200,000 in damages for emotional distress and legal expenses. The ruin was complete. The community, the extended family, and everyone who knew us cut ties with both of them. David lost his job and moved to a distant state, unable to bear the shame and isolation. He lost all succession rights to the house, and I formally disinherited him in a legal document signed and sealed by Mr. Jenkins himself. The house, the $350,000 in equity that Clara craved, became the legal monument to their betrayal and my survival. 2 years later, I am 76 years old, and I am thriving. I lost 30 pounds of stagnant fluid and edema in the first 3 months alone, and I've kept the weight off. My calves feel like oak stumps again. My cardiologist, utterly bewildered by the reversal, confirmed that my blood pressure, which used to spike to 170/100, is now consistently stable at 120/80 millimeters of mercury. I take only basic vitamins now, no expensive medications. The house, the center of their greed, became the headquarters for my new project, the 426 Project. It is not an impersonal foundation, but a simple community workshop. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, my living room is full of seniors, mostly women, who have been struggling with high blood pressure, fluid retention, or the exhaustion that doctors dismiss as just age. I teach them the tricks Eleanor taught me, the simple physics that saved my life. See your doctor, they want a complicated answer, I tell them, my voice full of humor now. But sometimes the solution is just the blood being in the wrong place. We bring it down to the feet. Get your water warm. Not hot, just warm. Sit down. Soak your feet for 15 minutes. Set the timer. I show them the numbers on my old BP monitor. I was 168/98 before the soak. 15 minutes later, 145/90. 23 points dropped on the top number, just with water. You have the power to control the pressure spikes, ladies. And when you feel that anxiety tighten your chest, we use the 426 breathing. Inhale for 4, hold for 2, exhale slowly for 6. It drops your pressure 18 points in 2 minutes. Eleanor Vance, now 78, is my co-director and the technical consultant. Together we have trained over a dozen volunteers and reached hundreds of seniors in the county, teaching them how to stabilize their health and, most importantly, how to identify the subtle signs of physical neglect or financial abuse that often hide in plain sight. I look out over the thriving garden where Eleanor and I planted bright red geraniums. The crippling paranoia is gone. I am respected, active, and surrounded by people who cherish me. I often think about the irony of it all. Clara wanted me dead, confused, and buried by Christmas to gain access to $350,000. Instead, I used the very house she coveted to build a legacy that actively protects the very people she tried to destroy. The woman who thought she was burying me simply buried her own future. I smile, a quiet, fierce contentment settling deep in my chest. David and Clara wanted me to die a frail, confused old woman who fell victim to natural causes. I used their own cheap, insidious weapon, the salt, to teach myself the simplest form of self-care. The greatest revenge, I realize, is not seeing them suffer in prison, but waking up every morning, strong and vital, enjoying the very life they tried to take. The vengeance is in the quiet victory, achieved not with expensive drugs or complex schemes, but with a batchia of warm water, controlled breath, and the simple courage to refuse to die. And if you stayed with me until the end, leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the story and what kinds of stories you'd like to read more of. Thank you so much for being here. See you in the next emotional story.